Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I want to let you know that I got 5 more Let's Not Meet stories for your viewing consumption. Now understand that none of the stories here are actually written by me, but rather by the lovely, amazing people at Let's Not Meet, so you can check them out, linked in the description below. In the meantime, I would like to add a quick disclaimer to this video. Some of these stories are pretty graphic and really terrifying, so I really would recommend you be careful before you go on. The only way to not be disturbed is by clicking off the video now. I also want to let you guys know that I'll try to have a video out every day for the next 4 days, so expect something every day for the next 4 days, whether it's Let's Not Meet or some sort of crappy pasta or something, plus a live stream on Halloween itself. With that being said, sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I'd like to sign off. Best Friends by Roko Fuji. I've been contemplating posting this story for a long time, mainly because it still weighs heavily on me, to be perfectly honest. But I want to hear the subreddit's opinion on it, so here it goes. First, I need to tell you that I've been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. The reason for me to tell you that is that my social skills are very bad. More often than not, I don't notice signs that people are bad before they have succeeded in hurting me, because I'm genuinely too trusting of others, since I put them up to my own standards of being honest and loyal. Now, my social awkwardness also meant that I never really had any friends growing up. Everyone thought I was too weird to hang out with, and so I had absolutely no idea how friends were supposed to act towards each other. And that might have been a huge factor in what might happen. After finishing the 10th grade, I live in Scandinavia, so no high schools, I went to a creative school as a sort of year off, before having to focus on what I wanted to do with my life. The first day came, and as usual, I was extremely nervous, and therefore I huddled myself in a corner, and I was just way too shy to talk to anyone. But then, suddenly, a seemingly nice girl comes over and sits beside me, asking me if I'm okay. Now, I think she instantly picked me out as easy prey, but at the time, I was overjoyed that someone had come to talk to me personally out of everyone else. Well, we became fast friends. At least I thought we did. And then she convinced me to share dorms with her, and everything seemed absolutely perfect. Looking back, I see a lot of things differently, and I know that things were off about her. She'd go off into a rage if I dared spend time with others who were not her, or if I dared talk back because I had a different opinion. At the same time, she completely assimilated my interests to convince me that we were a good match as friends, and buttered me up in a way that I reasoned away all the danger, all the weird red flags and signs coming from her. Every time I would question her actions, she would start telling me about her horrible past, of which I'm not even sure is half true. I know that now, speaking, she was a pathological liar, and she had no qualms of cheating money out of me at every turn. Well, the year goes by, and we go back to our homes. You would think, being far away from her, I would start seeing some signs. But somehow her influence over me only got deeper the farther away we got. She even got me to believe that my mother hated me, and she was the only one out of anyone who cared for my well-being during this whole situation. The first time I actually rebelled was when she made me drop out of our equivalent to high school. I was living at campus, or some sort of thing equivalent, and she'd get angry if I even left the MSN for a minute. So I never got sleep, and I didn't dare go to school because I knew it would upset her. When I dropped out, she, of course, refused to take any sort of responsibility, and I finally got mad at her for the first time, cutting off contact for months. In the meantime, I started searching for other friends on the internet and found some really cool bros. Many of them I actually still stay in contact with till this day. But 3 of the people that I actually met online, not only 1, but 3, was actually her stalking me on several different accounts on the internet, trying to convince me to be friends with her again, in the most insidious and manipulative ways possible, making me feel bad for getting mad. She then suddenly tells me that she's pregnant, also a lie, and convinces me to come visit her. Cue the 5 worst months of my life, and my experience with abuse in various different forms. She put me into debt too. So deep into debt that I still get letters from the bank. To this day, I still got a fear that my online friends are actually secretly her, just being there trying to ruin my life even more. Stalking me online and discrediting me to others. I got this anxiety and sleep problems because I still have nightmares of her being right outside my door. And it will probably influence my choices in future. So, supposed best friend turned out to be an insane stalker. Let's not ever meet again. A young veteran pulled a gun to my head by It's Plenty. So this happened about almost a year ago, and when I was visiting the U.S. Open Surf in Huntington Beach in California. Me and some friends were enjoying the day, getting all smugged up and drunk, when we ran into a friend of ours working at the bar in downtown Huntington Beach. We were on our way out, however, our friend insisted that we stay until he's off so that he can buy us a round and hold us over. He's 20 at the time and tells us that he wants to hang out and drink, but unfortunately his bar won't let him drink there on days he works. Yeah, he's 20, but honestly, they don't care. They'll serve employees of all kinds, I guess, damn the license needed. He then tells us that there's a bar down the street that never cards him, and he's a regular there, so they'll let him in even though it's busy, but not in his work clothes. I really don't know the reasoning right there. So I pounded down the rest of my beer and tell everyone to head to the bar, and that I'll jog back to where we park and grab clothes from the bag that I packed for the trip. We had to park like 2.5 miles away since the US Open got so packed. Flash forward to about 35 minutes of walking, and I'm nearly back to my friends after getting the clothes. As I'm getting to the end of the bar district in town, I see a girl crying with a few friends, and a man sitting a few feet away, facing away from the group. He was also crying. Now, at this point, I'm pretty inebriated, so I have no senses to keep out of it. I approach the crying girl. She is being standed by a man and another woman and I think a couple, and I ask if everything's okay. She tells me that she needs to calm her boyfriend, but he won't talk to anyone in the group. The man she's standing with says that it's his best friend, and he gets like this at times, to where he gets too angry or just gets this weird fear of hurting everyone he loves and just shuts down and keeps to himself. I'm all about getting him back in the party mode, so I'm gonna see what I can do to help this guy out. I walk over to him and ask that if he's okay. He just kinda sucks up his tears and side-eyes me. I tell him that I'm not trying to overstep any boundaries, but just seeing if I can just lend a hand and help out. He offers a half smile and says, "Yeah, I'll talk." Tells me about their night. Sounds like a blast. Then, he gets about 5 to 10 minutes before I show up. Apparently, he was kicked out of the bar he was in because he broke up a fight between 2 other people, and the bouncer just assumed that he was involved. He's starting to get heated at this point, and his mood goes straight to anger. He starts yelling at me about having friends killed in Iraq, telling me that he's done a couple of tours and then he's seen so much bad shit. He just wanted some time with his friends and his girlfriend on his goddamn break. He's crying and screaming about dying friends, and all of a sudden he's like, fuck this. I'm putting that bouncer to the ground with them. He takes his backpack off and starts fidgeting with it on the ground. And then, out comes a handgun. As soon as he pulls it out, he stands up. I don't know what got into me, but I got in his face. He's crying and telling me to move, and that I don't respect him, and the bouncer doesn't respect him, and he's gonna kill him. So I better move before he kills me too. I tell him, no one's getting shot tonight. Not by him, at least. That's when the barrel goes straight to my forehead, and he's staring me dead in the eye, finger on the trigger. I begin to calmly tell him, look at the situation as if he's 3 feet away, looking at another vet. Pull the gun on someone who has plenty to be proud of. A military family. A person who cares about the lives lost and the lives saved because of what he did for his friends and what he had done. Tell him to look at me as if someone else is doing this, and he'll see it happen. Tell him I truly respect him for enduring what he has done with his time and all of his beneficial aspects in the military. And then watch that disappear in a second the moment he pulls that trigger. No one around us is saying a word. I'm the only one talking. I hear my voice saying all these things, and it almost felt like I was speaking over a loudspeaker, as if someone else is telling it. I then ask him to put the gun away and talk to me again. Talk to me as he was just before all of this. And I would forgive him and move on with my night as if nothing happened. He does, and I hug him. His friend surrounds us and hugs us. They're all crying. He's crying, apologizing, telling me that he'll give me all of his money on him and all this shit. I break from the embrace and tell him that I don't really want anything from him other than to never put anyone in this situation ever again. And to get home safe with his girlfriend, who clearly loves him very much. We part ways, and I meet up with my friends. I didn't tell him any of this story. Just as I said, I wouldn't want to be the guy with the gun. So, even though it ended safely, a man in the military put their gun to my head. Let's not meet again. Jealous husband meets babysitter with an axe after his wife cheats on him. By Lamorphy. This happened ages ago when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13, living in the countryside. I was babysitting most children in my street, 20 houses max. This particular neighbor would love to go out on Wednesday because there was this Latin dance class that was going on at a nearby bar. So, I used to babysit for her, and I knew that she'd always come back very late. That specific night, the oldest of 3, was a little difficult and didn't want to go to sleep. I struggled with putting him to bed, and afterwards, after finally getting him to sleep, I was tired. I studied my math a little, and around midnight I decided to take a nap until the kid's mom came back. A few minutes after falling asleep, I hear someone frantically knocking at the door, trying to open it, jiggling the lock as it went on. It was the neighbor with her 2 young children. It was winter, and we easily had 3 feet of snow on the ground. The temperature must have been negative 21 Celsius or negative 5 Fahrenheit. The kids only had their pajamas on and an unzipped jacket, while she was wearing jeans and a wool shirt, as well as winter boots. I could see fear in their eyes as they struggled with unlocking the door. I panicked and had her walk all the way around the house to the patio door. And that's when she got in. She quickly told me to bring all the children downstairs and turn off the lights, and not to answer the door for anyone. The kids kept asking, "Who's Daddy gonna kill? Who's Daddy gonna kill?" And she kept muting them and saying nothing was gonna happen, and then she left. I woke up all the kids who were upstairs and then brought them down to the playroom in the basement and then asked them to play silently. The oldest, who hadn't been asleep long, was asking what was going on, and I kept telling him it was just a special occasion where he could play late with the neighbor kids. I calmed down to 2 other kids, telling them that no one was gonna die, but in my mind, my time had come. I could see myself being shot while trying to protect these kids. I was trying to figure out possible contingencies on how to stay alive, or at least how to keep the kids alive, even if it meant my own demise. I wasn't trying to be a hero, but I was trying to convince myself that if it had come down to that, I'd at least try to protect them. I called 911, but started shaking and crying so much that I didn't know what to do. It was an answer machine asking if I wanted cops, the ambulance, or firefighters. I called my mom and told her quickly what was going on, and that's when she called the cops and joined me. As she got in the driveway, the neighbor's husband was walking up the street with a huge axe. My mom got into the house, locked the door, and cracked open the window, and then asked what was going on while he was approaching the house. He asked her to come out and confront him, thinking that it was his wife. My mother explained to him that she was the babysitter's mother and was starting to get worried. He then asked us to give him his wife, but again, we didn't know where she was. He argued with my mom for a little bit, but she was so calm that it almost calmed him down. I still admire her for that night. After 10 to 15 minutes of arguing, he walked back to his house, still carrying the axe in hand, and a few seconds later, his wife knocked on the patio door behind the house and came in. She was crying and apologizing to my mother for the whole situation. She thought that her neighbor was home, not the babysitter. My mother asked me to go check on the kids when she was taking care of the wife. A few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived, and then they came in. They spent time with the wife, asking tons of questions. Then they asked those questions to me, and then my mother. In the meantime, the woman I was babysitting for arrived. They interviewed her too. They asked me and my mom if we were ready to go to court if the woman pressed charges against her husband. Surprisingly, she never did. Turns out, she had just announced to her firefighter husband that she was sleeping with her boss in order to get a raise because they were struggling financially. He got his firefighting axe and said that he was going to kill the bastard, but she wanted him to stop. That's why she brought the kids and left. I was always scared of him afterwards, and whenever I saw his children, I would go check to see if they had any signs of violence done to them. But sadly, they moved 6 months later, and then we moved 2 years later. So, strange firefighter guy, let's not meet again. Creepy Kindergarten Encounter by Kitty the Monster Cat. This happened when I was in kindergarten, so I was about 5 or 6 years old. My mom had recently welcomed home her second baby, and he wasn't born in the best condition. This isn't important until later. Anyways, my school district had an early release date for us. However, my mom must have not have seen it on the school calendar, because she wasn't waiting outside for me. My old apartment building was the kind of building where you either needed a key or to be buzzed in by a tenant. Because I was 6, I didn't have my own key, so I rang the bell. However, my mom didn't buzz me in as she didn't know I was to be let out early. With no choice but to wait outside, I sat down on the steps and waited for my mother. It seemed only a few minutes had passed before a man walked up the steps with a key in hand. Assuming he was one of the other residents, I quickly explained my situation to him and asked if he would let me inside. The man obliged, letting me in, but told me to stick with him for safety. Naturally, this made sense to me, so I agreed. I reckoned he wanted to stop at his apartment for a moment, and then he would walk me to where I lived. He opened the door and stepped inside the building. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me behind him. It just dawned on me that it was a rather small apartment building. And on top of that, my mom knew almost all of the tenants. Yet, for some reason, I didn't recognize this man as one of them. But I figured he must have moved in recently. I found it weird that the guy grabbed my wrist, but when I tried to pull away, he only held it tighter. Once we got inside, he quickly began walking down the hallway towards the back door. At this point, I knew something was wrong, but being a 6-year-old, I couldn't do anything to help my cause. For what happened next, I am forever grateful. My mom's friend, we'll call her Michelle, was on her way to the back door because that's where the parking lot was. Upon seeing the man trying to take me out back, she screamed at him, demanding to know who he was and what he thought he was doing with me. The man quickly let go and ran out back past Michelle. That's when Michelle took me back to her apartment and let me wait there until my mom got home. I asked Michelle about this recently, and she told me that the man had been a resident of the building, and that even though she called the police, they were unable to figure out who he was. So, creepy man who tried to make off with me. Let's not meet again. Bloodthirsty mob surrounded our ambulance. By Muchos Machio. From 2006 to 2008, I was a student at university in England studying paramedic science. This course was a 2-year fast track into becoming a qualified paramedic EMT. The course involved placements at various points throughout both years. First, we spent an evening and night in a dispatcher's. I will never forget some of those calls. For example, there's this one about a man waking up in his bed next to his wife who died during the night. Next, we were stationed with patient transport service, taking patients to their hospital appointments when they couldn't get there alone. Finally, after waiting a good 6 months for the opportunity, it was time to spend a prolonged placement with the 999 crews. You could choose a couple of preferred locations, and I was fortunate enough to be given an ambulance station close to my home. So, I moved back to my parents' home that winter for a full term, leaving my university buddies behind. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't, because it turned out to give me far less of an interesting experience. The station in Buxton and Derbyshire, Google Map it, it's in the middle of nowhere territory. It's also 45 minutes from the nearest hospital, so you better not get badly hurt out there. Only, people actually did. One evening, we responded to a call where a guy came off his bike on a cat and fiddle run. It's named after a pub by the same name on that road, which passes over the Pennies. Bikers actually love to bomb up and down that road. It's notorious. The guy broke a brick wall with his body. Legs were over his shoulders. We took him in with blue lights to the aforementioned hospital. To be honest, I don't think he survived. And this is where things get messed up. We turn to go leave our hospital, travel maybe half a mile, and then we get flagged down by a pedestrian. She shouts through the window that somebody has been beaten badly. We later find out this was the case of somebody bumping into somebody else in a bar, and nothing more. At that exact moment, a guy in a red t-shirt stumbles out from the side streets and collapses onto the road. I had been in the rear passenger seat of the patient compartment, my mentor and her technician riding up front. They got out before me to help him, while I open up the side bay. Stupidly, I climb out as my mentor helps him in. That's the point at which I noticed two things. He isn't wearing a red t-shirt. In fact, He was topless and saturated from head to waist in his own blood. And there's a mob of people heading straight at us. Maybe 10, maybe 15, I forget. I'm still out of the ambulance and pretty much frozen in terror. I'm only 19 at this point, and let me tell you, I'm a fucking pussy. This is 2007. Thankfully, my mentor hauls me inside, locks the door instantly, and then she turns to me, asks if the rear door is locked, and let me tell you, it wasn't. They open it from outside as my mentor starts pushing them back. I couldn't believe it. Heckles of them, telling them to pick on a group of people and not just one man. After about 10 minutes, we managed to actually get the door shut and locked. What happens next will stick with me forever. And clearly, it has, as I'm telling the story nearly 10 years later. They begun to try to flip the ambulance. Meanwhile, another guy starts hammering on the side of the window and actually shatters it and eventually cuts himself wide open, and blood started to splatter everywhere. But despite this, like a zombie, keeps going. They were animals. There is a window between the rear and the front cabin, and we see a police car approaching. He doesn't stop. He continues straight past. Please give UK cops guns. I do not blame him for not stopping. Only later, I did find out that the keys were still in the ignition, but nobody had attempted to enter the cabin. And this was only from sheer luck. My mentor actually managed to get into the front cabin and drive us away. But I'm surprised I actually survived. Anyway, crazy hooligan mob. Let's not meet again. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host at Creepy Reading, and today I want to let you know that I know you came here for a top 5, but I found 3 fairly good stories, and since it's the season to be scared, I figured that 3 more stories this close to Halloween would be a nice, pleasant surprise for all of you guys to listen to. So in the meantime, let's start with A Unwanted Visitor in the Irish Courtside by Dank AF 94. Seriously, this looked like a good story, and it's been upvoted a lot, so please enjoy the first of the 3 extra narrations I'm providing today. I've been following this sub for ages, and finally figured that it was time for me to share one of my most messed up encounters. This is my first post on Reddit, and I've never been a great writer, so apologies if this is a slow narration. But this is, without a doubt, one of the creepiest experiences of my life. A bit of info about myself. Currently, I'm 22 years old and male. I've lived in a large-sized town, not too far from London, most of my life. This story took place about 12 years ago, when I was 10 years old, and actually took place in the country of Galway, on the west coast of Ireland. This is where most of my family originates, through my grandparents, and lots of my aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. Unfortunately, this story starts the day after we buried my grandfather. The decision was made to bury him in Galway, despite the fact that I lived in England for the past 58 years of his life, which I thought was slightly odd. But it was all influenced by pretty strict religious/social traditions among Irish people. I came from a pretty big family, and despite it being a sad occasion, it was pretty cool to have our entire family gathered together like this. For people who might be unfamiliar with Ireland, or in this case, it's West Coast, it's not the most pleasant of places to be, in all honesty. They got all crap weather, fresh from the Atlantic Ocean, so it's pretty much raining year-round. This story takes place in the winter months too, where it's pretty much 24/7 downpours and regular gale force winds. Despite Ireland being a pretty small country in relation to places like the US or Australia, where I know a lot of posters of the subreddit originate, in areas like this you could drive for hours and hours and barely see any signs of civilization other than people's homes, which would be spread along the side of the road, normally about 100 to 200 meters apart. A lot of these houses would be poorly kept, so much that it made me wonder if they were even inhabited anymore. This might not sound too particularly bad to a lot of people, but as a kid who've grown up in a relatively lively city-state environment, the dreariness and isolation of this place made me feel creeped the hell out, even before the story had really even started. So, at the first event of the story, the funeral had taken place the day before. A lot of the family had said their goodbyes and gone back home. We were staying at my aunt's house, which is fairly large. It was a fairly large house that our husband had built when they moved from England to Ireland almost 5 years ago. So it was a pretty modern setup compared to most of the rundown houses that you found in this area of the country. My parents had decided to drop it on me today that we'd be staying for 4 days longer than we originally planned. In hindsight, I think it's because my aunt was still having a hard time with my grandfather being gone. Also, it's rare that my parents really get away from home, or get the chance to spend time with my family. My first thoughts were, oh great, more time stuck in this shit heap. But I reluctantly accepted it, since it meant more time away from school, which I wasn't really enjoying at that age. It's nighttime at this point, around 9 p.m. I'm myself in the living room, which is at the front of the house. I was sort of passing out on the sofa watching Shallow Hal. The typical Irish weather was smashing against the window. The wind was howling so much that the stronger gusts would make the house shudder. The rest of my family were in the kitchen and dining room, socializing, drinking, despite the hangover most of them still had after the funeral drinking session of the previous night. To describe the layout of the house in a bit more detail, in front of the house was a long driveway that stretched about 50 meters towards the gate, which were connected to a bumpy, poorly kept road that led to a lot of other houses in the area, most of which were spread out about 200 meters away from each other. So walking to even the closest neighbor took a lot of effort. The house had a driveway that extended around the side of the house so that people could park their cars behind the house as well, the side where the kitchen was, and they could also enter through the back door. A car would approach the house. You'd normally hear the crunching of gravel under the tires, and then there were the sensory lights at the front which would switch on so you'd notice when somebody was approaching. Except on this occasion, the pattern was a bit different. I couldn't hear any sort of movement outside the house. Even with the gale force winds, I could normally hear the loud grinding of gravel under the tires. It was enough to wake us up at night when somebody came back from the pub in the early hours. I could see the lights come on through the curtains. Initially, I just looked out of the closed curtains and thought that it was a bit peculiar, but it didn't set off any kind of alarm bells yet, at least not on my 10-year-old brain. The lights outside slowly dimmed and then went off completely. It was dark again, until just a few seconds later when the lights came right back on, only to slowly dim and switch off moments later, still with no sound of cars coming from the outside. After this happened for the 4th time, my curiosity got the better of me and I went over. I opened the curtain and glanced out. Just as I approached the curtains, the lights dimmed and went out again. So by the time I glanced out, I was just peering into pure distilled black darkness. After a few seconds, the light came on again, and I just remember getting the fright of my life, like a jump scare from a horror movie. Only a few meters from the window, there was an elderly woman wearing nothing but a white nightgown and a pair of white trainers, standing on the front lawn in the most extreme weather Ireland has to offer. It must have been near freezing outside. Moments after the light came on, she spotted me glancing out the window, and then turned her gaze to look at me directly. Even now, I struggled to describe the look on her face. It was hard to make out, like a mixture between fear, anger, euphoria, Like, she could feel pain, but was enjoying it somehow. And her face was constantly flinching as the powerful raindrops hit, well, her face, which made her look more hard to interpret. At the time, after the initial jump scare style reveal of this old, decrepit woman, I wouldn't say I felt fear. She's just an old woman who's around the same size, if not smaller than me. But I was still well and truly creeped the fuck out. Almost like it was an ambience thing. We were in the middle of nowhere and this woman appeared almost out of thin air, and there was something quite clearly wrong with her. All that I could really think to do was leave the window, walk back to my family kitchen, and tell them what happened. There's a, fucking old woman outside the front of the house. Initially, they looked at me with a kind of WTF look on their face for a few seconds before my uncle, my mom's brother, shot up from the chair and pointed out the kitchen window at the back of the house, basically saying, what? In a fairly short space of about 20 seconds since I left the front window, she'd made her way around the left side of the house and was now staring at us through a completely different window. At this point, in a strange way, the situation took an almost comical turn, as my aunt, whose house we were in, stood up and said, "Oh, for fuck's sakes, not again!" And she stood up to put her coat on and grabbed her car keys, and then leaving through the back door, right next to where the woman was. We all looked at her in confusion as if to say, "Again? You mean this happened before?" We watched out the window as she talked with the woman and eventually brought her inside her car and drove away with her. After she left, her husband explained to us that this old woman lived down the road from them. She suffered from very severe dementia and would regularly go wandering around the fields and roads in the area. Amazingly, where this woman lived was over a kilometer away from where we were, at least, meaning that this woman must have been well in her 80s, wearing only a nightgown and a pair of trainers, in near freezing temperature, rain and gale force winds, and somehow had managed to wander over 1,000 meters and eventually end up in our front garden. Seriously, Irish women are beasts. I got thoroughly freaked out though when my aunt's husband explained to us the incident that happened about 6 weeks beforehand. She lives with her son, who is her caregiver, and frequently breaks out of the house and goes wandering. Most people in the area were okay with this because they figured that she wasn't doing any harm until one day she managed to get inside a dog kennel that one of the locals had in their back garden. She picked up a jagged piece of metal from the person's garage and for some reason decided to stab one of the huskies that they had inside the kennel, and it killed it. Oh great. So now that this woman is potentially dangerous and wandering aimlessly around the area, as if in a dreary, dream-like landscape, this couldn't get any creepier. But that's not the worst part of the story. The next evening, I was in the house. This time, it was only me and my older cousin, who was around 17 or 18 at the time. As if everyone else had gone down to the pub about 5 kilometers away, me and my cousin weren't really in the mood, so we stayed and watched TV. It was getting late. We were watching The Fugitive, but I was struggling to keep my eyes open, so I got myself into a comfortable position and dozed off for a while. I woke up not knowing what time it was, and only to complete silence. I was alone, TV was off, and my cousin, he was gone. Even the weather was uncharacteristically quiet and silent on this occasion. I couldn't hear any rain. I got up from the sofa and stood up. I was barefoot at the time, and the first thing I realized that when my foot hit the floor is that it was extremely cold. Even considering the weather outside, the house had powerful heating that was on pretty much round the clock. I guess someone must have left the window open, or maybe a back door was open for some reason. I walked out of the living room and turned facing towards the back of the house, with the door to the kitchen on my left and the stairs to my right. As I stood in the hallway, I could feel the wind blowing against my bare feet. This was just a bit of a draft. I knew the back door was open. I instantly got the infamous feeling described in so many of these Let's Not Meet stories. The feeling that something was wrong. That something was there with me. This was just a totally different feeling from the previous night. The feeling of being creeped out had developed into feeling as if I was in complete danger, completely isolated and by myself. Where the fuck had my cousin gone? The kitchen light was off at the time, so the only thing I could see was whatever was illuminated by the ceiling light of the hallway that I was standing in. That was until, to my confusion, I saw a small flashing of multicolored lights in the kitchen, moving at a floor level, slowly from the direction of the back door towards where I was. While I was so focused on the lights, I should have been focusing on above them, because, as they moved closer, I could see the nightgown, and as she got even closer, I could see the rainwater dripping onto the tiled kitchen floor, which just helped reflect the flashing lights in her trainers, as well as my own impending doom. After I clogged on and came to my senses, realizing what was in front of me, I launched myself towards the stairs, and I mean I actually launched my feet to touch the floor of the hallway, and I did a crazy run crawl up the stairs and locked myself in a room that me and my brother had been sharing during our stay. Slightly odd detail about the house, and really convenient for the situation, that almost every door in this house had peepholes, instead of just a front door. I never got around to asking my aunt why this was, so I stood, glued to the peephole, peering out into the hallway in a rush. I really had thought that I'd turn on the light to the upstairs hallway. Luckily, the peephole had a full view of the stairs, so I could see whomever was coming up them. At this point, it's still complete silence, no wind, no rain, only my heavy breathing, muffled by my face being pressed against the door so hard. The view of the hallway was motionless for a long enough time that I started to think that I almost hallucinated the whole thing, and that there's really no one out there. Eventually, I could see her face. She made her way slowly creeping up the stairs before stopping near the top. Her position meant that I could only see the top half of her body from the waist up. And that was just enough, because that much of her was making my heart pound. The view from the peephole was fairly poor, and I could just about make out her facial expression. It was empty, emotionless, almost like a vegetable-like state. Her mouth was just hanging open, which gave her an almost zombie-like appearance. Then the groans started. For a second, I thought that it was creaking the floorboards of the house or something, but it gradually got louder and louder. It was a dull, emotionless, which would drag out for about 4 to 5 seconds before stopping completely. It was completely monotone, but somehow had enough impact and emotion to make my whole body shiver and shake. I don't actually know how long I was standing there listening to her, but eventually she slowly started moving back down the stairs, the groans growing more and more silent as she moved away. I still didn't fucking move from that door until I heard the sound of gravel crunching under car tires. Turns out, my cousin had left after I slept, and went to go pick up my drunk family from the pub, leaving the door unlocked in the process. As soon as they pulled the car behind the back of the house, they were concerned, since the back door was wide open, and they found muddy footprints and pools of water all over the kitchen floor. I'm guessing in hindsight that her family/carer got her trainers with flashing lights on the side to make her more visible in the darkness in case she ever went wandering in the nighttime. Whoever's idea that was, thank you. Because fuck knows what would have happened to me if I wandered into that kitchen without being able to see her coming towards me. The weird thing is, looking back on it, I don't think I felt physically threatened by this woman. Despite being only 10, I was a fairly large kid, and in a 1-to-1 physical struggle, I probably could have overpowered her, even if it had come to that. I think my fear came from the fact that my idiotic 10-year-old mind, waking up to find my cousin gone and this woman in my kitchen, felt like something supernatural was happening, like she was some sort of ghost or banshee or something. It's stupid, I know, but that's how my mind worked back then. I remember even being in Dublin, waiting for the ferry over Wales, constantly looking over my shoulder, even though this woman was on the other side of the country at this point. Like, she was just gonna appear randomly and stab me, like she did that poor husky. As I grew older, though, I look quite differently at this whole thing. My grandmother is currently suffering from dementia, and I worked with dementia patients part-time at the university. This event was a pretty early sign in life that dementia is no fucking joke, and people with dementia, especially in severe cases, need real 24-hour care so they're not a danger to themselves or others around them. The fact that this woman was allowed to wander aimlessly through the freezing Irish courtside into God knows what house, whose house, or God knows what, makes me wonder if her family or health services even cared about looking for her after all. Now that I look back on it, it's more of a sad story than a creepy story, at least from my perspective. Also, Brendan, if you're reading this, fuck you for leaving my door unlocked, and creepy old woman, let's not meet again. Let's Just Go for a Drive by Mia PM. Okay, so this encounter happened back in 2009. I was 17 years old in year 11 at high school. It was a weeknight, and I had just left from my then boyfriend's house, probably around 6 p.m., to catch a train home. I caught the buses and trains everywhere, so I had the pleasure of bumping into a lot of quirky people quite often, but this night was a bit different. I was waiting at the train station. It was still somewhat light out, and I was the only person on the platform at that point. Because around that time of day was still considered a peak hour, I usually didn't have to wait long for my train, but on this fateful day it had been delayed. I was sitting halfway down the platform on a bench, and just about 10 meters away, a man joined me, waiting for the train. He had a phone on his ear and was quietly talking to someone else. Obviously I thought nothing of it. A few minutes passed, and I noticed the man hung up the phone, and was slowly edging closer to where I was sitting, shooting me quick glances every now and again. Now I suffer from fairly terrible anxiety, so I immediately started feeling a little nervous. I watched the movements out of the corner of my eye. He's a tall, muscular-looking man, probably in his mid-late 20s. Sure enough, he eventually made his way over to my bench, but decides not to sit down. After a few minutes of silence, he says, "Hey." I look over to him, pretending that I didn't just watch him slowly walk over to me, and say hello back. "What are you doing tonight?" he asked, barely making eye contact with me. Heading home." He's silent for a while, and I was just praying that he'd walk away, but then out of nowhere begins starting to make sexually suggestive comments towards me and starts complimenting me on my looks. Now remember at the time not getting scared about how abrupt and inappropriate the comment it was, but laughing instead. I was tired, I looked like a mess. Seriously, I practically looked like one of those homeless people. I looked like a big ugly ball, and I seriously thought this guy was fucking kidding around. But he looked unimpressed, and I was angry when I laughed. Uncomfortable again, I just murmured a thanks and kept my hands down, strolling aimlessly through my phone. He then asked me how old I am. I tell him 17, underage, but that does not deter him. And he says, "You should come with me." I immediately begin to panic all over again because back when I was way too polite and never wanted to hurt anyone's feelings, instead of telling the guy to leave me the fuck alone, I started to make up shitty excuses on why I need to get home as soon as possible. I have family coming for dinner. I have so much homework. I'm not feeling very well. He looked annoyed and ignores everything I've just said and tells me that there's a party tonight and he wants to take me there. Without even thinking, I blurt out, "What the hell? You don't even know my name." He suddenly sits down next to me and his face serious. He tells me his car's in a parking lot about 100 meters away. We should go out now. It'll be fun, drinks, music. I'll buy you some new clothes. Before we go anywhere, that is. By this point, I am freaking the fuck out, and I just wanted him to leave. Other people are arriving at the station by now, and I'm looking around and desperately trying to get someone's attention. But at the point, I was too scared to get up and move. I don't want him to see that I'm scared, so I continue smiling and saying, "I'm sorry, but I have a boyfriend, you have to go home." And then he says, "You'll forget about him." Then I see it, the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. My train was approaching the station. I was close to getting away from this guy, but of course, he saw it too. I begun to gather my things and stand up, and that's when he grabbed me by the arm and started pulling me back to my seat. "Come on, let's just go for a drive." I got to my feet again and started pulling my arm away from him, but he held on. I thought to myself, surely people are watching this, right? Someone will come and help any moment now, but no one did. People could see me trying to get away from this man. They're acting completely oblivious to it. The train rolled up to the platform and people begun to exit as the train was trying to get going. I was still trying to pull out this guy's grasp. He suddenly let go without missing a beat. I hightailed it onto the train's carriage just before the door closed, breathing uncontrollably. People in the train were staring at me wide-eyed, no one asking me if I was okay, if I needed help. I looked out the train window and the guy was staring into the window at me. His phone was now back up to his ear as the train slowly pulls away from the station, and he began walking down the platform. I'm guessing towards his car. At the time, I was just freaked out by the strange man who tried to be physically forceful with me. But 7 years down the track, I'm aware about how dangerous that situation could have been. I know he clearly wasn't waiting for the train, and I don't know who he'd been on the phone with. Ever since then, I swore to myself if I ever saw someone visibly uncomfortable or scared in public, I'd at least do my best to figure out the situation. And my only message to people listening right now, if you're ever in a situation like that, and you feel uncomfortable, the best thing you could do is yell aloud and get the attention of people. It may not work all the time, but the more commotion you make, the more voices you speak, and the more you make yourself known to be in trouble, the more likely you are to get some sort of help. It may have ended good for me, but it might not for you. So, creepy man at the subway station, or train station as it were, let's not meet again. I Think a Nun Tried to Steal My Baby by Danny Kinetic. My stepfather's an idiot. He's an ex-alcoholic and drug addict who is heavily involved with several Catholic churches and local AA communities. AA stands for Alcoholics Anonymous, for those who don't know. The drugs and alcohol must have seriously fried his brain because he still has really bad judgment and decision-making skills, especially when it comes to people. He brought so many sketchy people to my life, and thank God nothing serious has happened. I get it. He's trying to help others who are struggling with the same types of battles that he went through. And maybe he's making a little bit of a difference in people's lives. But he's been bringing these kinds of people into my life since I was 4 years old. Some of them even lived with us for a while. I had kids young. When I was 20, I had my son, and 23 when I had my daughter. When my son had his first birthday, my stepdad and mom retired. My mom had me when she was 40, and decided to travel, going on mission trips with their churches, and moving to another state. They started working with this Catholic organization that specifically helps people struggle with alcohol and drug addictions. The church gave them housing among their nuns and priests and paid them a small amount of money to buy food and the necessities while they worked with them. One year around Christmas, my parents came home for the holiday and brought an older nun with them. She was probably in her 50s. My family got together and went to Santa's workshop, which was super crowded. My mom and stepdad and their nun friend, and my sisters and their kids came too. My daughter was about 6 months old, maybe less. She was a beautiful red-headed baby, and I received many comments from my family and strangers on how beautiful she and her red hair are, and probably have a few other stories of people who don't understand personal boundaries regarding children. The nun was immediately taken back by how beautiful my baby was and kept touching her, talking to her, picking her up, wanting to hold her. It was immediately uncomfortable because this was my first time meeting her. Also, she wasn't acting this way with any of my other children that were with us. My son, who was 3 years old at the time, has since been diagnosed with ADHD and was a handful, running all over the place, getting into everything, you know how it is. It's so hard going to places with him and her without, well, my significant other. This person didn't come with us, most likely because they were working. So I think I was distracted because my son was getting into something that he wasn't supposed to, and I let go of the stroller for just a second, and then this nun immediately took it. She told me that she would give me a break since, well, she was a friend of my parents and my family was all around it, so I decided to let the nun push my daughter in the stroller. Another incident happened where my son was getting into something, and I was distracted again for less than a minute when I turned back and the nun and my daughter were gone. I freaked out, and my whole family was still around me, and no one knew where this nun went. She didn't say anything to anyone about leaving. My family and I immediately started looking everywhere. Luckily, there's so many of us that we eventually found a nun in front of the building near the exit. Let me tell you, it was terrifying. When we found her, she just said that they were taking my daughter on a stroll. I decided to leave right after that happened. So did everyone else in my family, and luckily, I haven't seen her since. So yeah, creepy nun that knows my parents. Let's not meet again. Quick edit here. I forgot to mention some of the weird comments this nun had made about how if she hadn't been a nun and had children, she imagined that they would look just like my daughter because red hair runs in their family. Another small but interesting detail is that my oldest sister, who was there earlier with her 3 kids, also had a baby girl who was only a couple of months old at the time. I don't understand why the nun latched onto my daughter in particular, other than her having red hair. Is hair color that really big of a deal? Or would it have been because I was a young parent and didn't have the other with me? Further update. I called my mom today and asked a few questions about the nun. I believe she legitimately is a nun. She worked for their organization and introduced them to, well, they were introduced to them by another nun and a priest that they knew. She frequently worked with them and lived in Maryland, setting up retreats and meetings for addicts. At one point, the nun had planned to go on a mission trip with my mother, but something came up and it didn't happen. My mom and stepdad moved around a lot during their retirement and haven't talked to her since they left Maryland, which was about 2 or 3 years ago. They recently moved back home and left that organization, and my stepfather works for a whole new one doing similar work. And my mom is fully retired. My mom doesn't think that there was anything weird about the situation, that it was no big deal. The nun took my daughter on a stroll and didn't think to tell anyone where she was going. I haven't seen her since because she still lives in Maryland and my parents don't even talk to her anymore. I actively try to avoid people my parents hang out with for fairly obvious reasons. So once again, nun, let's not meet again. Hello guys, and welcome to the end card. I know you guys made it this far, but if you please like to hear me out, it would be amazing. It's Halloween season, and I'm really working on improving the stock footage that I shoot and doing all that thing. But in order to do that, I'm really going to need to pull in a few more Patreon followers. If you guys could consider donation, like even if it's only a small amount, like $1 or $5, either way, you get some interesting perks. I'll be able to contact you personally and send you a personal thank you or a call or something. Really, anything you can do to help out this channel is really much appreciated. That being said, I'll let the end card play out, and you guys can get on to the next video.